Most people think all TVs are basically the same. Different brands, different sizes, different prices. But at the end of the day, a screen is a screen. That's what it feels like. Until you place two TVs side by side, and something feels off. One looks deeper. One looks brighter. One feels more natural. The other feels exaggerated. And suddenly, what looked like a simple decision becomes confusing. Because now you're not just choosing a TV. You're choosing how everything you watch will look. Every single day. And here's the part most people don't realize. That difference you're seeing is not about resolution. Not about 4K or 8K. Not even about size. It's about the type of screen. The way the TV actually creates the image. And that changes everything. But almost nobody explains it in a way that connects to real experience. They explain it in terms of technology. Names, acronyms, specifications. And while that sounds useful, it doesn't tell you how it feels to live with it, which is where most people make the wrong decision. Because they understand the words, but not the impact. And that's what this really comes down to. Understanding how each screen type behaves, not just what it's called. Because two TVs can both say 4K and still look completely different. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most TVs today fall into two main categories. Screens that create their own light and screens that rely on a backlight. And that difference is where everything begins. Self-lit screens, like OLED, don't need a separate light source. Each pixel turns on and off individually, which means when something is black, it's actually off. No light, no glow, just darkness. And that creates a certain kind of image. One that feels deep, layered, precise. Because light only exists where it's needed. But here's the part most people don't think about. That precision changes how everything else looks. Bright areas feel brighter. Because dark areas are truly dark. Contrast increases. Not because brightness is extreme, but because there's no interference. And that creates a very specific experience. One that feels clean, controlled, almost effortless. But this is where people make an assumption. They think this automatically means better. And in some ways, it does. But it also introduces differences that not everyone expects. Because when blacks are truly black, dark scenes become darker than usual. And that changes visibility. Subtle details can become harder to see. Not because they're missing, but because there's no background glow to reveal them. And that's where perception shifts. Because what looks cinematic doesn't always feel practical. Now, on the other side, you have LED-based TVs. These don't produce light at the pixel level. They use a backlight, a layer of LEDs behind the screen that shines through it. And the screen itself controls how much light passes through, which creates a different kind of image. Because now, light is always present, even in darker scenes. It's just reduced, not removed, and that creates a different feeling. Blacks are not completely black. They're dark, sometimes very dark, but not completely off. And that changes contrast, not dramatically at first, but enough to notice over time. But here's where LED screens have an advantage. Brightness, because they rely on a separate light source. They can push more light across the entire screen, which makes them perform better in bright environments. Rooms with windows, daytime viewing, situations where light control is limited. And this is where most people don't realize something important. The better screen depends on where you use it, not just what it can do. Because a screen that looks incredible in a dark room might feel different in a bright one. And a screen that handles brightness well might feel less impressive in darkness. Now here's where things get more complicated. Because not all LED TVs behave the same. Some use basic backlighting. Others use more advanced systems. And that's where terms like local dimming and mini LED come in. Basic LED TVs light the entire screen evenly, which is simple, but limited. Because when one part of the image needs to be bright, the whole backlight stays on. And when another part needs to be dark, it can't fully turn off. So you get a compromise. But with local dimming, the backlight is divided into zones, sections that can dim independently. So now, bright areas stay bright, while darker areas dim, which improves contrast, but introduces something else. Because zones are larger than pixels, they can't match the image perfectly. So sometimes, light spills into areas where it shouldn't, creating a subtle glow, especially around bright objects on dark backgrounds. And once you notice it, you start seeing it more often. This is where mini LED comes in. More zones, smaller zones, better control, closer to pixel-level precision, but still not exact, which means the experience improves. But the limitation doesn't disappear. It just becomes less noticeable. Now here's where things start to blur. Because at a glance, a high-end mini LED can look very similar to OLED. Bright highlights, strong contrast, sharp image. But over time, differences appear. Not always obvious, but consistent. And that consistency is what shapes the experience. Another screen type you'll hear about is QLED, which sounds like a different technology, but it's actually a variation of LED, using quantum dots to enhance color, increase brightness, improve vibrancy. And this is where perception plays a big role, because QLED often looks more colorful, more saturated, more eye-catching, especially in stores. But here's the part most people don't question. Is that color accurate or just intense? Because intensity can feel like quality even when it's not. And over time, that difference becomes noticeable. Not immediately, but gradually, as your eyes adjust, as your expectations shift. Another thing that changes how screen types feel is motion, not just refresh rate, but how each panel handles movement. OLED's fast response time creates very clean motion, no blur, sharp transitions. But that also means you see everything, even imperfections, frame inconsistencies, subtle stutter, things that were hidden before. LED panels, with slightly slower response, can actually feel smoother in some cases. Not because they're better, but because they soften those imperfections. And this creates a strange effect, where technically better motion doesn't always feel better, which confuses a lot of people, because they expect improvement, but experience something different. Another layer is viewing angle, how the image changes when you're not directly in front. Some panels maintain consistency, others shift, colors fade, brightness drops, contrast changes. And in real use, this matters more than expected, because not everyone sits perfectly centered. And if the image changes significantly, the experience becomes inconsistent. Now here's where most people overlook something subtle. Uniformity. How even the screen looks across its surface. No patches, no variations, no inconsistencies. And this is not something you notice immediately. But once you do, it's hard to ignore, because it affects everything, especially simple scenes. Solid colors, slow transitions. And since it's not a headline feature, it rarely gets attention, but it directly affects long-term satisfaction. Another factor is how each screen type interacts with light. Glossy screens preserve clarity, enhance contrast, but reflect more. Matte screens reduce reflections, but soften the image slightly. And this becomes important based on your environment, because reflections can break immersion. Even on the best screen, and a slightly softer image can feel better if it reduces distraction. Now here's the part that connects everything. No screen type is perfect. Each one is a set of trade-offs. OLED offers precision, but behaves differently in brightness. LED offers brightness, but sacrifices perfect blacks. Mini LED improves control, but doesn't eliminate limitations. QLED enhances color, but can exaggerate perception. And once you understand that, you stop looking for the best screen and start looking for the right one. Because the difference between screen types is not about which one wins. It's about which one fits your room, your content, your expectations, your sensitivity to certain details. Because what feels incredible to one person might feel off to another. And that's why so many people feel unsure after buying. Not because they chose a bad TV, but because they chose a screen type that didn't align with how they actually use it. And once you see that pattern, everything changes. You stop focusing on labels and start paying attention to behavior. How the screen handles light, motion, color, consistency. Because those things define your experience, not the name of the technology. And in the end, the best screen type is the one that disappears, the one you don't think about, the one that just works every time you turn it on. Because when you stop noticing the screen and start focusing on what's on it, that's when you know you chose the right one.